Diana's eyes burned with fatigue as she pulled into the driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel under tires, a small comfort after her 12-hour shift at Memorial Hospital. 17 days since Thomas's funeral, and the world still felt off-kilter, colors muted, sounds distant. Even her scrubs felt wrong against her skin, as if grief had altered her physical form. She blinked twice before registering what was wrong with the scene before her. The driveway was empty. The Toyota, Thomas's pride and joy for the past decade, was gone. A perfect rectangle of slightly darker concrete marked where it should have been, where it had been every day for years, parked at Thomas's particular angle that made it easier for her to back out. Diana sat motionless in her friend Carol's car, who'd given her a ride home tonight, a heaviness settling in her chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Thomas had been meticulous about that car, teaching her basic maintenance, so she'd never be stranded or taken advantage of by dishonest mechanics. It was the one constant she'd counted on in these first brutal weeks without him. Carol's voice broke through her thoughts. "What's wrong? You've gone pale." "The car, Thomas's Toyota. It's not here." Diana fumbled for her phone pulse, quickening as she scrolled through missed calls. 2 from her son James. She stepped out, thanking Carol automatically, her mind already racing through possibilities. Theft seemed unlikely in their quiet neighborhood. James must have borrowed it, though. Why he wouldn't text first. The moment she stepped inside, her phone rang. James. Relief flooded through her until she heard the clinical tone in his voice, so unlike the warm boy she'd raised. "I sold your car." "The Toyota. Got $8,000 for it, which is pretty good for a 10-year-old car. I've already put the money into an account I set up to manage your finances. You need to be practical now that Dad's gone." 4 simple words delivered with such casual cruelty that Diana gripped the kitchen counter to steady herself, her knuckles whitening against the worn laminate that she and Thomas had chosen together when they'd first bought this small house 26 years ago. "What did you say?" Her voice sounded strange in the empty kitchen, too high and thin against the background hum of the refrigerator Thomas had fixed just 3 weeks before his heart gave out. The satisfaction in James's voice made her stomach clench. "Mom, be realistic. I sold it yesterday. The money's safe in the new account. You need to start thinking practically now. But I need that car for work. The hospital is across town. There's no direct bus route." James's sigh crackled through the phone, impatient and dismissive. "Mom, you're 58. Should you even be working at your age? Besides, the insurance and maintenance would have been too expensive for you on your own." "On my own," Diana repeated the words, feeling foreign in her mouth. Thomas had been gone for exactly 17 days, and already her son was treating her like an incompetent child, rather than a woman who had supported a family and worked full-time for nearly 40 years. "Look, I've researched the bus routes. It'll take you about an hour and 20 minutes each way with one transfer. Earlier start to your day, but the exercise will be good for you." He spoke with the brisk efficiency he used when closing sales deals. "I'll text you the details. Got to run. Meeting in 5. The line went dead before Diana could respond. She stood motionless in her kitchen, still wearing her hospital scrubs, surrounded by casserole dishes and sympathy cards that had arrived after Thomas's funeral. The magnitude of what had just happened slowly sank in. Her son had sold her only means of transportation without asking her, without even warning her, and he expected her to be grateful. Diana sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Thomas would have known exactly what to say, how to handle James's presumptuousness firmly, but without creating a family rift. Thomas had always been the buffer between their son's increasingly materialistic outlook and her more traditional values. But Thomas wasn't here anymore. The thought brought fresh grief washing over her, a wave so powerful she had to close her eyes against it. When she could breathe again, she reached for her phone to call Ellen Thomas's oldest friend and their family attorney. If anyone would know what to do, it would be Ellen. Her finger hovered over Ellen's contact information without pressing. What exactly would she say? That her grown son had sold her car without permission, and she didn't know how to stand up to him. The humiliation burned hot in her chest. Instead, she set the phone down and walked to the window overlooking their modest driveway. The empty concrete rectangle mocked her with its barrenness. The practical implications of James's actions began to cascade through her mind. Her shift at the hospital started at 7:00 a.m. To arrive on time via the bus route James mentioned would mean leaving the house by 5:30 a.m. She'd return home after 8:00 p.m. on late shifts. In winter, both journeys would be in complete darkness. Then another realization hit her with stunning clarity: the car's title. Thomas had been meticulous about paperwork. For their 30th anniversary, he had transferred the Toyota's title solely into her name. "One less thing to worry about if anything happens to me," he'd said at the time. Had James even checked the vehicle's registration before selling it? Did he have any legal right to sell property that wasn't his? Diana walked quickly to the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom where Thomas had kept all their important documents. The vehicle folder was missing. Her hands began to shake as she searched more frantically through the neatly labeled sections. Insurance, medical house deed warranties. The entire automotive section had been removed. James must have taken the documents when he came by last week, ostensibly to help organize Dad's paperwork. She'd been grateful at the time, too, overwhelmed with grief and exhaustion, to question why he needed to take anything with him. Diana sank onto the edge of the bed, Thomas's side still undisturbed, his reading glasses still on the nightstand. The magnitude of her son's betrayal expanded like a dark stain. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. He had deliberately taken the documents, sold a vehicle he had no right to sell, and had the audacity to frame it as helping her. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text. James had sent a complicated bus schedule with multiple transfers, not the single transfer he'd mentioned. The journey would actually take closer to 2 hours each way. The final line read, "The exercise and fresh air will be good for you. We need to schedule a time to go through Dad's tools in the garage, too. I can probably get a decent price for them." His tools. Thomas's beloved tools collected over 40 years as a mechanic. The tools he had used to teach neighborhood kids basic car maintenance every summer. The tools that were extensions of his skilled, capable hands. Something shifted inside Diana, then grief transforming into a cold, clear anger she had never experienced before. Thomas wouldn't have wanted her to suffer in silence. He would have expected her to stand up for herself. She picked up her phone again, but this time she didn't hesitate. "Ellen, I need your help, and I need to know if there's any way to get into the Toyota's glove compartment without having the car." Ellen arrived at Diana's house 40 minutes later, her silver hair pulled back in its usual no-nonsense bun, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. At 72, she still practiced law part-time, specializing in elder rights and estate planning. She and Thomas had been friends since high school, bonding over a shared love of classic cars and justice in equal measure. He did what Ellen demanded after Diana explained the situation, her voice rising with indignation. She paced the small living room, the floorboards creaking beneath her sensible shoes. "James sold your car without permission, without even consulting you. He says he put the money in an account he set up for me," Diana explained, hearing how pathetic it sounded, even as the words left her mouth. Ellen's eyes narrowed. "An account you don't control, I'm guessing. One he has access to." Diana nodded, shame warming her cheeks. When had she become this person, this doormat that her own son felt comfortable walking all over Diana? Ellen sat beside her on the sofa, taking her hands in hers. "This isn't just inappropriate, it's illegal. The Toyota was in your name, not his. He had no legal right to sell it." He took all the car documents from Thomas's filing cabinet, Diana said. "I think that's why I needed to get into the glove compartment. Thomas always kept duplicates of important papers there." A small smile played at the corners of Ellen's mouth. Thomas was always prepared for every contingency. "It drove me crazy in court, but it was what made him such a good mechanic." She squeezed Diana's hands. "But there's something else you should know, Diana. Something Thomas asked me not to tell you, until it became necessary." Diana felt a chill run through her despite the warm spring evening. "What is it Thomas came to see me about 3 months ago? He'd been having some chest pains." What Diana interrupted fresh grief and guilt washing over her. "He never told me." "He didn't want to worry you," Ellen said gently. "You know how he was always protecting everyone else. The doctor had given him some warnings about his heart. And Thomas, he wanted to make sure everything was in order just in case." She opened her portfolio and removed a sealed envelope with Diana's name written on it in Thomas's familiar, precise handwriting. "He asked me to give you this if anything happened to him. And if James started behaving exactly as he is now." Diana's hands trembled as she took the envelope. It felt substantial, containing more than just a letter. "Before you open that," Ellen continued, "we need to focus on getting your car back. Do you know who James sold it to?" Diana shook her head. "He didn't say just that he got $8,000 for it." Ellen pulled out her phone. "What's the license plate number?" Diana recited it from memory. Thomas had insisted she always know their plate numbers, VIN, and insurance details. Ellen typed rapidly, then looked up with a triumphant smile. "I still have friends at the DMV. Let me make a call." While she stepped into the kitchen to use her phone, Diana sat holding Thomas's envelope, running her fingers over the neat letters of her name. Even now, nearly 3 weeks after his death, discovering something new from him felt like a lifeline thrown across the void that separated them. Ellen returned, looking pleased. "The car hasn't been re-registered yet. Whoever bought it hasn't completed the paperwork. That gives us an advantage." She sat beside Diana again. "Now about that glove compartment, what exactly do you think is in there?" "I'm not sure," Diana admitted, but Thomas was methodical about backups. He always said the glove compartment was the heart of the car's history. "Well, we're going to get that car back," Ellen declared, with the confidence that had made her such a formidable attorney. "But first, I think you should read what Thomas wanted you to know." With a deep breath, Diana carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and what appeared to be a small safe deposit box key. "My dearest Diana, if you're reading this, 2 things have happened. I'm no longer with you, and James has started making decisions he has no right to make. I've known for some time that our son has developed values very different from ours. While we raised him to respect people regardless of their wealth or status, he's chosen to measure worth only in dollars and appearances. I've prepared for this possibility. The key enclosed opens safe deposit box D247 at First National on Broadway. Inside, you'll find everything you need to understand what I've been building for us over the past 30 years. But there's something even more important in the Toyota's glove compartment, something James must never find. It contains proof of everything, plus an envelope you'll need to take to Ellen immediately. I'm sorry I kept secrets from you, my love. I wanted to protect you from worrying, and I wanted to be sure everything was perfectly in place before I shared it all. I thought I had more time. Know that every decision I made was out of love for you and hope for James to eventually become the man we raised him to be, not the man he currently is. All my love always. Thomas." Diana looked up at Ellen, tears blurring her vision. What was he building for us? What secrets? Ellen's expression was gentle but determined. "I think we need to get that car back to find out, and I have an idea how to do it." She pulled out her phone again. "First, I'm going to report the vehicle as stolen, which legally it was. Then I'm calling my grandson. He works at the DMV and can tell us exactly who tried to register the title transfer. Won't James get in trouble?" Despite everything, he was still her son. Ellen gave her a level look. "Diana Thomas was my best friend for over 50 years. He spent his entire life making sure you were taken care of. If James has interfered with that, then yes, he deserves whatever consequences come his way." As Ellen made her calls, Diana reread Thomas's letter, her fingers tracing his handwriting, hearing his voice in every carefully chosen word. Whatever was in that glove compartment, whatever Thomas had been building for them, it was clearly something he felt would protect her after he was gone, and James had unknowingly sold it along with the car. By the time Ellen finished her calls, night had fallen. She looked satisfied as she returned to the living room. Good news. The car was sold to a dentist in Boulder, Dr. William Reynolds. He bought it for his daughter as a college graduation present. It's still sitting in his garage. They won't pick it up until the weekend. She sat beside Diana, looking more energized than Diana had seen her since Thomas's funeral. "We're going to Boulder first thing tomorrow morning. I've already left a message with Dr. Reynolds explaining the situation." "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that your recently widowed status was exploited by someone who illegally sold your vehicle without permission." She patted Diana's hand. "Don't worry. I didn't throw James under the bus completely. I simply explained that a family member exceeded their authority during a time of grief. Diana nodded, grateful for her tact, as she struggled with the painful reality of her son's betrayal. Now Ellen continued, "Get some rest. Tomorrow we retrieve your car and find out what Thomas was protecting in that glove compartment." As she left, Diana stood in the doorway watching her headlights disappear down the street. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something besides grief stirring inside her. A quiet determination, a spark of the strength he had always seen in her, even when she couldn't see it herself. Whatever was in that glove compartment, Diana knew one thing for certain. Thomas had left her the tools to stand on her own against whatever came next, even if that whatever turned out to be her own son. The drive to Boulder the next morning felt surreal. Ellen insisted on driving, saying Diana looked too exhausted to be behind the wheel. Diana couldn't argue. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with questions about what Thomas could have hidden in the Toyota's glove compartment that was so important. "Did Thomas ever mention investments to you?" Ellen asked as they left Denver behind the Rocky Mountains, rising majestically before them. "Not really," Diana replied, watching the familiar landscape roll by. "He had his pension from the auto shop, and we had some modest savings. He always handled our finances." She felt a flush of embarrassment at this admission, how little she'd paid attention to their financial matters, content to let Thomas manage everything. Ellen nodded thoughtfully. Thomas was always more shrewd than people gave him credit for. Mechanics understand systems, how small parts work together to create something powerful. He applied that thinking to everything. The suburban sprawl of Denver gradually gave way to the more open approach to Boulder. They pulled up to an impressive house in a well-established neighborhood, the kind of place that spoke of old money and quiet prosperity. Dr. Reynolds was waiting for them in his driveway, a tall man with kind eyes and a concerned expression. Beside him stood a young woman Diana assumed was his daughter, looking uncomfortable in the morning sunlight. "Mrs. Walker," he greeted her, extending his hand. "I'm so sorry about this situation. Had I known the circumstances of the sale, I never would have purchased the vehicle." "Thank you for understanding," Diana replied, shaking his hand. "I hope this hasn't caused too much inconvenience." "Not at all," he assured her, though his daughter's expression suggested otherwise. Amber was excited about the car, but clearly this takes precedence. "I've brought the paperwork confirming Mrs. Walker's legal ownership." Ellen interjected all business as she handed him a folder and a cashier's check for the full amount you paid. Dr. Reynolds glanced at the documents briefly, then shook his head. "Keep the money, Mrs. Walker. This was an illegal sale. I couldn't in good conscience accept payment." Dad, his daughter, protested, but fell silent at his stern look. "Consider it my contribution to setting things right," he continued. "I lost my wife 3 years ago. I understand how vulnerable that time can be." His kindness brought unexpected tears to Diana's eyes. "Thank you," she managed. "The car's in the garage," he said, leading them around the side of the house. "I was impressed by its condition. Whoever maintained it did an exceptional job," my husband Diana said softly. "He was a mechanic." Dr. Reynolds nodded appreciatively as he opened the garage door. And there it was, the Toyota looking exactly as it had when it sat in their driveway for all those years. The sight of it, this tangible connection to Thomas, made Diana's heart clench. "The keys," Dr. Reynolds said, handing them to her. "Everything should be as it was when I purchased it." Diana thanked him again, and after a few more formalities, guided by Ellen's legal expertise, they were in the Toyota, heading back toward Denver. Diana sat in the driver's seat, breathing in the familiar scent that still held traces of Thomas's aftershave. "Are you going to open it?" Ellen asked, nodding toward the glove compartment. Diana's hands trembled slightly as she pressed the button. The compartment opened smoothly, revealing several neatly organized items, the car's manual registration documents, and a sealed manila envelope with "For Diana, Urgent," written across it in Thomas's handwriting. "Should I—" Diana hesitated, glancing at the road ahead. "Pull over," Ellen suggested. "Whatever's in there, you'll want to give it your full attention." Diana found a scenic overlook just outside Boulder and parked the mountains, providing a majestic backdrop to this moment of truth. With a deep breath, she opened the envelope. Inside was a USB drive, a letter, and several legal documents. She unfolded the letter first. Diana, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and something has happened that made you need to retrieve these documents urgently. I'm guessing it involves James. He's been showing concerning signs for years now, becoming more focused on appearances and status than the values we tried to teach him. The enclosed USB drive contains complete records of what I'm about to explain. The short version is this. For the past 30 years, I've been investing in real estate throughout Denver. What began as a small opportunity with my first bonus at the auto shop has grown into something substantial, very substantial. The properties are all held by Walker Mechanics LLC, a company registered solely in your name, though I've managed it. The portfolio currently includes 17 residential properties and 4 commercial buildings, including the Pine Ridge Heights luxury apartments. Diana gasped, looking up at Ellen. Pine Ridge Heights. That's where James lives. Ellen nodded, unsurprised. Keep reading. Yes, Diana. Our son has been paying $800 monthly rent to a company you own without realizing it. I never told him because I wanted him to make his own way, not rely on family connections for special treatment. The total portfolio value as of last month was approximately $4. $7 million with monthly income of $78,000 after expenses and management fees. All of this is yours. Everything is already in your name legally. My attorney Ellen has all the necessary documentation at her office, but I kept these backups in case James tried to interfere after my death. I've seen how he looks at the house, at your car, at my tools calculating their value rather than their meaning. The management company that handles day-to-day operations is Reliable Properties. Ask for Lisa Martinez. She's expecting your call if something happens to me. The password for the USB drive is Diana9964Walker. I'm sorry I kept this from you. I wanted to surprise you when I finally retired next year. We were going to travel, donate to those mechanic scholarships we always talked about, live the life we'd worked so hard for. Remember how strong you are, my love, how capable. You've always been the heart of our family, and now you have the resources to live exactly as you choose. All my love. Thomas? Diana stared at the letter, reading it 3 times to make sure she understood the modest life they'd lived, the careful budgeting, Thomas's insistence on handling the finances, all while he built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire for them, for her. You knew, she said to Ellen, not accusingly, but with sudden understanding. Ellen nodded. I helped him set it up legally. He swore me to secrecy until you needed to know. She smiled sadly. Thomas wanted to protect you from James's increasingly materialistic outlook. He saw it coming years ago, how James might try to control you financially after Thomas was gone. Diana looked down at the other documents in the envelope. Property deeds, account statements, contact information. All evidence of a life Thomas had built in parallel to the one they shared openly. Why wouldn't he tell me? She whispered, emotions colliding inside her. Gratitude, confusion, grief, love. He wanted to handle all the complex parts first, Ellen explained gently. Make it turnkey for you. And honestly, Diana, he worried you might let something slip to James before everything was properly secured. The truth of this stung, but Diana couldn't deny it. She had always made excuses for James's behavior, always tried to see the best in him, even as Thomas grew increasingly concerned about his values. What do I do now? She asked, feeling overwhelmed by this new reality. Ellen's expression turned determined. First, we secure these documents in my office safe. Then we call Lisa at the management company. And then she added with a gleam in her eye, we decide exactly how you want to handle James. Diana looked out at the mountains she and Thomas had hiked so many times over their decades together, feeling his presence more strongly than at any moment since his death. He had built all this for her, created security and independence she never knew she had, and James had tried to send her on a 2-hour bus commute selling her car, without permission planning to sell Thomas's beloved tools for quick cash. For the first time since Thomas's death, Diana felt something beyond grief taking root inside her. Determination, strength, a clarity of purpose that would have made her husband proud. "Let's go," she said, starting the Toyota's engine. "We have work to do." Ellen's office was nothing like the sleek corporate spaces James frequented. Housed in a converted Victorian near downtown Denver, it featured worn leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a distinct absence of pretension. Yet, as Diana sat across from her desk, watching her secure Thomas's documents in an old-fashioned safe, she understood that real power often resided in such unassuming places. "Lisa Martinez is expecting your call," Ellen said, handing Diana her office phone. "I suggest putting it on speaker so I can help with any technical questions." Lisa answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. "Mrs. Walker, I've been expecting your call. Let me first say how sorry I am about Thomas's passing. He was an exceptional man." "Thank you," Diana replied, surprised by her genuine tone. "I'm just learning about everything." "Of course. Thomas arranged for a complete briefing whenever you were ready. Would you prefer to meet in person?" They scheduled a meeting for the following morning, and after ending the call, Diana turned to Ellen with the question that had been burning in her mind. "Did everyone know about this, except me?" Ellen's expression softened. "Not everyone." Thomas compartmentalized carefully. "Lisa knows you own the properties but doesn't know you weren't actively involved. The tenants only know Reliable Properties as their management company. The only people who knew the full situation were Thomas, myself, and my associate, who helped with the legal structures." Diana nodded, trying to process the magnitude of what Thomas had built while maintaining their modest daily life. All those evenings he spent helping friends with car troubles. He was often inspecting properties or meeting with contractors, Ellen confirmed. "He hated misleading you, Diana, but he wanted everything perfect before the reveal." Diana's phone buzzed with a text from James. "Checked on you this morning, but you weren't home. Remember, doctor said to take it easy. I've listed Dad's tools on an auction site. Should fetch good prices." The casual presumption that he had the right to sell Thomas's beloved tools, that he needed to monitor her whereabouts, that she required management rather than respect, ignited something in Diana that had been smoldering since his call about the car. "What are you going to do about James?" Ellen asked, noticing her expression. Diana considered the question carefully. The revelations of the day had shifted everything, transforming her from the grieving widow James thought he could control into the owner of the very apartment building where he lived. The power dynamic had completely reversed, yet wielding that power carelessly would make her no better than him. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This isn't just about teaching James a lesson. It's about helping him become the person Thomas and I raised him to be, not who he's chosen to become." Ellen smiled approvingly. "Thomas always said you were the moral compass of the family." That afternoon, Diana returned home with the Toyota parked proudly in its usual spot. She half expected James to call immediately, demanding explanations, but her phone remained silent. Either he hadn't discovered the car's return, or he was formulating his response. Diana used the quiet hours to explore the USB drive Thomas had left, entering the password on her laptop with trembling fingers. The drive contained meticulous records of every property purchase, renovation, rental income, and investment decision over 3 decades. Spreadsheets showed how Thomas had started with a single small rental house purchased for $42,000 in 1992, gradually building the portfolio through careful reinvestment of profits. What struck her most were the personal notes Thomas had included with each property file. His hopes for how each investment would improve their future, observations about neighborhood developments, even sketches for renovations he designed himself. This wasn't just a financial enterprise, it was a labor of love. One folder was simply labeled Diana's Dreams. Inside were detailed plans for all the things they had talked about doing someday when they could afford them. Traveling to Italy to see the art she'd always admired, establishing scholarships for young mechanics from underprivileged backgrounds, renovating their modest house while keeping its character intact. Thomas had been actively planning for these dreams to become reality. Tears streamed down Diana's face as she realized the depth of his love and foresight. While she'd assumed they would always live their modest, comfortable life until traditional retirement, Thomas had been building a different future, one where financial constraints wouldn't limit their ability to make a difference or enjoy their later years. The doorbell interrupted her emotional exploration. Diana closed the laptop and wiped her eyes before opening the door to find James standing on the porch, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "The car is back," he stated flatly, looking past her toward the kitchen, as if expecting to find answers there. Want to explain how that happened? Diana took a deep breath, channeling the strength she'd felt in Ellen's office. I think you're the one who owes me an explanation, James. You sold property that wasn't yours to sell. He blinked, momentarily thrown by her direct approach. This wasn't the acquiescent mother he was accustomed to. I was trying to help you streamline Mom. That car was too expensive for you to maintain on your own. The car that Dad maintained himself at minimal cost. The car that's fully paid for. That car. Diana held his gaze steadily. James shifted uncomfortably. The insurance alone is $63 per month, Diana finished for him. Well within my budget, as you would know if you'd bothered to ask, instead of making decisions about my life without my input. Look, he said, adopting the condescending tone he often used when he thought he was being patient. You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly about practical matters. Dad always handled the finances, and now I'm handling them, Diana interrupted firmly, starting with reclaiming my illegally sold vehicle. James's face flushed. How did you even know who bought it? I never told you. I have resources you don't know about, James. The statement was mild, but landed with unexpected weight. Now I believe you've also listed your father's tools for sale without consulting me. They're just gathering dust in the garage, he protested. They could fetch a few thousand that you need more than sentimental clutter. Each dismissive word about Thomas's prized possessions, the tools that had supported their family for decades, strengthened Diana's resolve. But she maintained her composure, remembering that her goal wasn't to punish James, but to correct his course. I need you to remove those listings immediately, she said calmly. Those tools are not for sale, and we need to have a longer conversation about boundaries and respect, but not today. I have an early meeting tomorrow. A meeting? What meeting? The confusion on James's face might have been comical under different circumstances, the idea that his mother might have important business apparently inconceivable to him. That's not your concern, she replied simply. But I do need the details of the account where you deposited the money from selling my car. Since you've been reimbursed by the buyer, that money belongs to me. James stared at her as if she'd started speaking a foreign language. Mom, what's gotten into you? Since when do you talk like this? Since I decided to honor your father's memory by standing up for myself, Diana answered truthfully. Now the account details, please. Something in her tone must have conveyed that she wouldn't be backing down. After a moment of tense silence, James pulled out his phone, forwarded the account information to her, and left with a confused backward glance that suggested he was reevaluating everything he thought he knew about his grieving, supposedly helpless mother. As Diana watched him drive away in his luxury SUV, she felt neither triumph nor vindication, only a calm certainty that she was finally standing in her own power exactly as Thomas had always seen her. Tomorrow would bring the meeting with Lisa Martinez and a fuller understanding of her new reality. But today had already brought something equally valuable, the first step toward reclaiming not just her car, but her voice. Reliable Properties occupied the entire top floor of a brick building in downtown Denver. Diana felt distinctly out of place as she rode the elevator up in her simple navy dress, the one she'd worn to Thomas's funeral. Ellen had offered to accompany her, but this felt like something Diana needed to do alone. Her first step into the new life Thomas had prepared for her. Lisa Martinez met her at the elevator doors. She was younger than Diana had expected, perhaps mid-40s with an efficient demeanor, softened by genuine warmth in her eyes. Mrs. Walker, welcome. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Thomas spoke of you often and with great admiration. Diana followed her through a modern office space where a dozen or so employees worked at sleek desks. None gave her a second glance, just another client visiting their boss. If only they knew she owned the company that employed them. Lisa's corner office offered panoramic views of downtown Denver and the mountains beyond. She gestured for Diana to take a seat at a small conference table where folders were already arranged in neat stacks. Thomas prepared extensively for this transition. He updated these briefing materials every quarter, ensuring you would have current information whenever it became necessary. Diana nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. Even in death, Thomas was taking care of her, anticipating her needs before she knew them herself. "Where would you like to begin?" Lisa asked gently. "With an overview, I suppose," Diana managed. "I'm still trying to comprehend the scope of all this." Lisa opened the first folder, revealing a map of Denver with properties highlighted in different colors. The Walker Mechanics portfolio currently includes 17 residential properties and 4 commercial buildings spread strategically across the metropolitan area. For the next 2 hours, Lisa walked Diana through each property purchase dates, renovation histories, current occupancy rates, rental incomes, and future potential. The residential properties ranged from a 4-unit building purchased in the early days to the crown jewel Pine Ridge Heights, the luxury apartment complex where James lived. Pine Ridge generates the most revenue, Lisa explained. 32 units, all premium priced with a consistent 98% occupancy rate. Your son's Unit 14B is one of our largest 2-bedrooms. Does James know who owns the building? Num. All tenants deal directly with reliable properties. The ownership structure, your ownership, is not disclosed. Lisa hesitated. Thomas was quite specific about maintaining that separation, especially regarding your son. Diana nodded, understanding Thomas's reasoning better now. James's respect had become increasingly tied to perceptions of wealth and status over the years. Learning his mother owned his luxury apartment building would have fundamentally altered their relationship, perhaps not for the better. And the commercial properties, Diana prompted. Lisa turned to another section of the briefing materials, 4 total, including this building's top 3 floors. The most significant is Riverside Plaza downtown, a mixed-use development with retail on the ground floor and offices above. Diana's head swam with the magnitude of it all. While she'd been working shifts at the hospital, living their modest life in their modest home, Thomas had been quietly building an empire that now generated more monthly income than she'd earned in her best years as a nursing assistant. Thomas set everything up to run smoothly without requiring your direct involvement. Lisa continued. Reliable Properties handles all day-to-day operations, maintenance, tenant relations, rent collection. Our quarterly management fee is 8% of gross rental income, slightly below market rate. And my role in all this, Diana asked. As owner, you have final authority on major decisions, property acquisitions, or sales, significant renovations, rent adjustments beyond standard annual increases. Lisa smiled. But as Thomas often said, the beauty of the system is that it doesn't require your constant attention unless you want to be more involved. By the time they finished reviewing the materials, afternoon light slanted through the windows. Lisa closed the final folder and looked at Diana expectantly. "It's overwhelming," Diana admitted. Understandably so. Thomas built something remarkable, but he did it incrementally over decades. Lisa hesitated before adding, "He was so excited about finally sharing it with you. He'd planned a surprise trip to Italy next year, where he was going to tell you everything. Italy, where Diana had always dreamed of seeing the Renaissance art she'd only experienced through books and documentaries. The trip had been on her someday list for their entire marriage. "There's one more thing," Lisa said, reaching into her desk drawer. She pulled out a small box and handed it to Diana. "Thomas left this with me about a month ago. He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you during our first meeting." The box was wrapped in simple blue paper, Diana's favorite color. With trembling fingers, she removed the wrapping to find a jewelry box inside. Opening it revealed a beautiful gold pendant in the shape of a key studded with small diamonds. A note tucked inside read, "You've always held the key to my heart. Now you hold the keys to our future. Use them wisely, my love." Tears blurred Diana's vision as she fastened the necklace around her neck. It felt both like a final gift and a passing of responsibility, Thomas entrusting her with the fruits of his decades of careful work. "What would you like to do next?" Lisa asked after giving Diana a moment to compose herself. The question hung in the air, pregnant with possibilities she'd never imagined having. She could sell everything and travel the world. She could move into a luxury apartment like James's. She could donate to causes Thomas and she had always supported, but could never afford to help substantially. But as the initial shock began to fade, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Thomas hadn't built all this just for financial security. He'd created options, the freedom to make choices based on values rather than necessity. "I need time to process everything," Diana said finally. But there is one immediate matter. My son James, the tenant in 14B at Pine Ridge Heights. Lisa nodded, her expression carefully neutral. Yes, I understand his lease is month to month. When she confirmed this, Diana continued, I'd like to review the terms, and I'd like to know if there have been any issues with him as a tenant. Lisa hesitated before answering. Your son has been prompt with payments. However, there have been multiple complaints from neighbors about noise parking violations and what the building manager described as a generally entitled attitude toward staff. This didn't surprise Diana. James had always expected special treatment, a tendency that had only worsened as his career in sales advanced. I see, Diana said, her decision solidifying. Please don't make any changes to his situation yet, but I would like to schedule a property tour of Pine Ridge Heights tomorrow if possible. As the new active owner, I should familiarize myself with all the properties, starting with the most significant. Lisa's slight smile suggested she understood perfectly what Diana was considering. Of course, Mrs. Walker. I'll arrange everything. The building manager, Mr. Patel, will be delighted to show you around. As Diana left Reliable Properties that afternoon, the gold key pendant resting against her chest, she felt a strange mixture of grief and possibility. Thomas was gone, but he'd left her with more than just financial assets. He'd given her the power to reshape relationships that had become distorted over time, particularly with their son. The question now was how best to use that power, not for revenge or petty satisfaction, but for something Thomas would have valued more, helping James find his way back to the values they'd tried to instill in him throughout his childhood. Tomorrow's visit to Pine Ridge Heights would be the first step in a careful recalibration that had been long overdue. Pine Ridge Heights stood in one of Denver's trendiest neighborhoods, its sleek glass and steel facade reflecting the morning sunlight. As Diana parked the Toyota in the visitors section, deliberately choosing to drive herself rather than arrive in the company car Lisa had offered, she tried to see the building through fresh eyes. This wasn't just her son's apartment complex anymore. It was her property, part of Thomas's legacy to her. The lobby featured marble floors, a waterfall wall, and staff dressed in crisp uniforms. Amir Patel, the building manager, greeted her with professional courtesy, showing no indication that Lisa had revealed her ownership status. To him, she was simply a company representative touring the property. Pine Ridge maintains a 98% occupancy rate with minimal turnover, he explained as they entered the elevator. Our amenities include a rooftop pool fitness center with yoga studio, business center, and 24-hour concierge service. Diana nodded, absorbing details about her own property that she'd never known. And the tenants. What's the demographic? Primarily young professionals and executives, Amir replied. Average age 35 to 45. Average income in the upper six figures. Many work in finance, tech, or healthcare administration. The world James had aspired to join, where value was measured in income brackets and job titles. As they toured the immaculate fitness center and the stunning rooftop pool area, Diana couldn't help wondering what Thomas had thought, watching their son embrace these superficial values while distancing himself from the principles they'd raised him with. We've prepared a vacant unit for your inspection. Amir continued, leading her down a hallway on the 14th floor. It's identical in layout to units 14A through D. Diana hesitated. Actually, I'd like to see 14B specifically. A flicker of something concerned discomfort crossed Amir's face. 14B is currently occupied, Mrs. Walker. We don't typically enter tenant units without proper notice unless there's an emergency. I understand, Diana assured him. I don't need to enter. I'd just like to verify its location relative to other units. Amir relaxed slightly. Of course it's this way. He led her down another pristine hallway to a door marked 14B, James's home. The luxury apartment he'd been so proud to secure 2 years ago, making a point of mentioning its exclusivity and waitlist whenever conversation allowed. There have been some concerns regarding this particular tenant, Amir said, carefully keeping his voice low. What kind of concerns? He hesitated clearly, uncomfortable discussing tenant issues with someone he perceived as company management. Nothing that violates lease terms explicitly. Noise complaints, occasionally some issues with guest parking, a tendency to expect exceptions to building policies. Diana nodded, unsurprised. James had always believed rules were flexible for people of certain status, a perspective that had intensified as his sales career advanced. And how does the tenant respond when these concerns are raised? Typically with promises to comply, followed by temporary improvement before the behaviors resume. Amir replied diplomatically, "We've documented everything according to company policy." As they continued their tour, viewing the business center where young professionals worked on laptops and the elegant community room available for resident functions, Diana considered what she'd learned. James wasn't just living beyond his means financially. He was bringing the same entitled attitude to his home life that he displayed in selling her car and planning to sell Thomas's tools. After completing the tour and thanking Amir for his time, Diana sat in her car in the visitor parking area, contemplating her next steps. Through the lobby windows, she could see residents coming and going, some in business attire, heading to work, others in casual clothes, walking designer dogs. All of them living in a building she owned, including her son, who believed his mother needed to take the bus to work. The irony might have been amusing if it weren't so painfully revealing of how far James had strayed from the values Diana and Thomas had tried to instill. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Notice the car is back. We need to talk about your financial situation. Dinner at my place tonight, 7:00 p.m. The presumption in his tone was nothing new, but Diana's perspective had shifted dramatically. This wasn't her successful son generously offering guidance to his struggling mother. This was a man who had illegally sold her property, now assuming he could continue managing her life without consequences. Diana texted back, "I'll be there at 7, and yes, we definitely need to talk." That afternoon, Diana met with Ellen to update her on what she'd learned from Lisa and her tour of Pine Ridge Heights. Ellen's office felt like a sanctuary of straight talk after the carefully diplomatic language of the corporate world. "So what's your plan for tonight?" Ellen asked after Diana had filled her in. "Going to drop the property ownership bomb immediately or build up to it?" "Neither," Diana replied, surprising herself with the clarity of her decision. "I'm not going to tell him yet." Ellen raised an eyebrow. "James needs to understand something more fundamental first, that his behavior toward me has been unacceptable regardless of my financial situation." Diana twisted Thomas's key pendant between her fingers as she spoke. "If I tell him about the properties now, he'll change his behavior because I'm wealthy, not because he respects me." "Thomas would approve," Ellen said with a smile. "He always said you saw people more clearly than anyone he knew." "I failed to see how James was changing," Diana admitted. "Or perhaps I saw but didn't want to acknowledge it." "We all have blind spots where our children are concerned," Ellen said gently. "The question is what you do once your eyes are opened." By the time Diana arrived at Pine Ridge Heights that evening, she had a clear plan not for revenge or dramatic revelation, but for beginning the more challenging process of helping James reconnect with values he'd abandoned in pursuit of status and appearance. The concierge greeted her politely, checking her name against the visitors list before directing her to the elevators. As Diana rode up to the 14th floor, she touched the key pendant at her throat, drawing strength from this tangible connection to Thomas. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the dignity and purpose he had always seen in her, even when she couldn't see it in herself. James's apartment was exactly what Diana had expected, sleek, impersonal, and carefully curated to project success. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased downtown Denver's glittering skyline. Designer furniture arranged for appearance rather than comfort. Conspicuously placed status symbols throughout. An expensive watch collection displayed in a glass case. Framed photos of James with minor celebrities at charity events. A wine refrigerator stocked with bottles Diana knew cost more than she'd spent on groceries in a month. Mom, right on time. James greeted her, air-kissing her cheek. He was dressed casually in what Diana recognized as premium athleisure wear, the kind advertised in glossy magazines for people who wanted to look effortlessly wealthy even in relaxation. "I ordered dinner from Bellini's. Hope you like Italian." "That sounds lovely," Diana replied, noting that he hadn't cooked himself. Thomas had always insisted on preparing meals from scratch when they had guests, believing food made with personal effort carried more meaning than anything purchased. James poured wine into crystal glasses, handing one to Diana, before gesturing toward the living room. "Let's sit. We have important things to discuss." Diana took a seat on the uncomfortable but visually striking sofa. Looking around with new awareness that her son lived in a property she owned, surrounded by luxury items purchased on credit, while believing his recently widowed mother couldn't afford car insurance. "I see you got the car back." Somehow. James began his tone suggesting Diana had done something mildly amusing, but ultimately misguided. "Care to explain how that happened?" "The buyer returned it when he learned it had been sold illegally," Diana replied simply. "Without my permission or authority." James waved this off. "A technicality. I was handling it for you." "By sending me on a 2-hour bus commute to work." Diana kept her voice steady, not accusatory, but matter-of-fact. "Mom, be realistic. You can't afford to maintain that car on your nurse's aide salary. Dad always handled the finances, the maintenance, everything. I'm just stepping up to help now that he's gone." There it was, the fundamental assumption underlying his behavior, that without Thomas, Diana was incapable of managing her own affairs, that his judgment automatically superseded hers because of his perceived financial superiority. "I appreciate your concern," Diana said carefully, "but I didn't ask for that kind of help. What I need from you is respect for my autonomy and my property." James sighed with exaggerated patience. "This is exactly why we need to talk. You're not thinking practically. Grief is affecting your judgment." He leaned forward, adopting the same tone he likely used with difficult clients. "I've put together a financial plan for you. It involves selling the house, it's too big for you alone anyway, and moving into a senior living community." "Senior living," Diana repeated, genuinely startled. "I'm 58, James. I'm not ready for a retirement community. It's not just for elderly people," he explained condescendingly. "It's for individuals who need a more supportive environment. No home maintenance, planned activities, transportation services." The doorbell interrupted what was clearly a rehearsed pitch. James excused himself to accept the food delivery, returning with several containers of upscale Italian takeout. As he plated pasta and salad with practiced efficiency, Diana considered how to proceed. The temptation to reveal her financial situation immediately, to see the shock on his face when he realized she owned this very building, was strong, but ultimately unproductive. "I've already found a suitable community," James continued as they began eating. "Morningside Gardens. It's modest but adequate for your needs. The sale of the house should cover the entry fee, and your pension will handle the monthly costs if you're careful." Diana set down her fork. "And what about what I want, James? Have you considered that at all?" He looked genuinely confused. "I'm doing this for you, Mom. So you don't have to worry about money or maintenance or transportation. By selling my home out from under me, by getting rid of my car without permission, by planning to sell Dad's tools." Diana kept her voice calm but firm. "Those aren't helpful actions. They're controlling ones." James's expression hardened. "Someone needs to take control. You're clearly not equipped to handle these decisions." Based on what evidence? Diana challenged quietly. "My 35-year career, my mortgage that's been paid on time every month for 26 years. The fact that Dad and I raised you, put you through college, and did it all without ever carrying credit card debt." He flushed slightly. "That was different. Dad was handling things. We were partners," Diana corrected. "We made decisions together based on shared values and priorities." James's phone chimed with an incoming text. He glanced at it and frowned. "It's from the property management company. Apparently there's a building inspection scheduled for tomorrow." Inconvenient timing. The irony nearly made Diana smile. Her building inspection, scheduled with Amir during her tour earlier, was already causing ripples in James's carefully controlled world. About those tools, Diana said, redirecting the conversation. "I've removed your online listings. They're not for sale." His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. "How did you even know how to do that? And why they're just collecting dust? They were your father's livelihood for 40 years. The tools that paid for your education, your first car, the down payment on your first condo." Diana met his gaze steadily. "They have value beyond what they might fetch at auction. Sentimental value doesn't pay bills, Mom." "And what bills are so pressing that we need to sell Thomas's tools immediately?" Diana asked. "The mortgage is current. The utilities are on auto pay. I have health insurance through the hospital." "What financial emergency are you solving?" James seemed momentarily at a loss, unused to being challenged on his financial pronouncements. Is it about planning ahead, creating a cushion, being practical? Or is it about control, Diana suggested gently. About making decisions for me because you've decided I can't make them for myself. The direct question hung in the air between them. James took a long sip of his wine before answering. "I'm trying to help you," he said finally, his tone suggesting he was speaking to someone slightly dim-witted. "Dad asked me to look out for you before he died." This caught Diana by surprise. "He said that specifically." "Well, not in those exact words," James hedged, "but he knew you'd need guidance with financial matters. He always handled everything." Diana thought of the extensive documentation Thomas had left, the careful preparations he'd made to ensure she would have not just financial security, but complete independence. The contrast between what Thomas had actually done and what James claimed he'd wanted couldn't have been starker. "I think I knew your father better than you did," Diana said quietly, "and I don't believe that's what he wanted at all." James's expression hardened. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're being emotional rather than practical. This is why I took initiative with the car." "That initiative was illegal," Diana reminded him. "The car was in my name only. You had no legal right to sell it." A technicality he dismissed again. "Family helps family. I'm trying to secure your future." Diana studied her son across the table. This person she'd raised, but somehow failed to instill with the values Thomas and she had lived by. The realization was painful but necessary. James wouldn't hear her as long as he saw her as financially inferior and therefore less worthy of respect or autonomy. "I appreciate dinner," Diana said, rising from the table, "but I think we should continue this conversation another time when we're both willing to listen to each other." James looked startled. "You're leaving?" "We haven't finished discussing the senior living arrangements." "There's nothing to discuss," Diana replied firmly. "I'm not selling my home or moving to Morningside Gardens. Those decisions are mine to make, not yours." As Diana gathered her purse, James's expression shifted from surprise to condescension. "Mom, be reasonable. You can't manage alone. The yard work, the maintenance, the finances. It's too much." Diana paused at the door, turning back to face him. "I've been managing just fine, James, and I'll continue to do so. The question isn't whether I can handle my life without your father. It's whether you can handle the fact that I don't need your control disguised as help." His face flushed with anger, but Diana left before he could respond, walking calmly to the elevator with a strange sense of lightness. For the first time since Thomas's death, she had stood her ground completely, not just about the car or the tools, but about her fundamental right to direct her own life. As Diana drove home in the Toyota Thomas had maintained so carefully, she realized tonight had been an important test not of James, but of herself. She had faced her son's attempts to control her without revealing the financial power she now held. She had asserted her autonomy based on principle rather than position. Thomas would have been proud. And tomorrow, when Amir Patel conducted his inspection of Unit 14B, would bring a subtle but significant shift in the dynamics between mother and son, one James wouldn't even recognize until much later. The game had changed, but only Diana knew the new rules. The building inspection notification had clearly rattled James more than he wanted to admit. He called 3 times the following morning, each message more agitated than the last. "Mom, this inspection is ridiculous." They've never done one before. They're asking to check everything. Plumbing, electrical, even closet spaces. It's invasive. Can you believe they're threatening lease violations if I don't comply? I pay premium rent for this place." Diana let the calls go to voicemail, focusing instead on her meeting with Lisa Martinez. They sat in her office reviewing the property portfolios with special attention to Pine Ridge Heights. "The inspection is standard procedure when ownership changes." "Hands," Lisa explained. "We're conducting them at all properties to give you a comprehensive understanding of current conditions." "And has James been notified? It's a change of ownership inspection," Diana asked. "No tenants are simply informed. It's a building-wide assessment. Your ownership remains confidential as per the protocols Thomas established." Diana nodded, satisfied. "And Amir understands to treat Unit 14B exactly like all others. No special attention, positive or negative." "Absolutely. He's our most professional manager, completely discreet." By afternoon, Diana was back at her modest home tending to Thomas's garden while listening to increasingly frustrated voicemails from James. The final one came at 3:17 p.m., his tone shifting from annoyed to alarmed. "Mom, you won't believe this. The building manager just cited me for 3 lease violations, unauthorized modifications to the thermostat system, excessive noise complaints, and improper storage in the fire exit stairwell. They're threatening to revoke my lease if I don't address everything within 2 weeks. This is ridiculous. I know the owner of the management company through work. I'm going to have someone's job over this." Diana set down her gardening tools, brushing soil from her hands as she considered this development. She hadn't instructed Amir to find violations, but she wasn't surprised he had. James had always considered rules to be flexible guidelines that didn't fully apply to him. Her phone rang again. Ellen this time. "Your son just called my office," she said without preamble. "He wants me to draft a complaint letter to Reliable Properties about harassment and selective enforcement. Apparently there's been an inspection." Diana couldn't help laughing. "Did you tell him you represent me?" "Not him. I simply said I'd need to check for conflicts of interest before I could advise him, which is technically true." Ellen's tone turned serious. "How long are you planning to maintain this charade, Diana? The longer it continues, the more complicated the eventual revelation becomes." She had a point. Diana's initial instinct to withhold information about her ownership of James's building had made sense as a way to assess his attitude without the complicating factor of her newfound wealth. But extending the deception much longer might undermine the ultimate goal, helping James reconnect with values beyond material success and status. "I'll tell him soon," Diana promised, "but I need him to understand something fundamental first, that his behavior has been unacceptable regardless of my financial situation." "Well, he's certainly getting a taste of his own medicine with this inspection business," Ellen observed. "Sometimes natural consequences are the most effective teachers." After they hung up, Diana checked her watch. James would be finishing work soon. It was time for the next phase of what she'd begun to think of as Operation Perspective Adjustment. Diana drove to Pine Ridge Heights, timing her arrival to coincide with the end of Amir's workday. He greeted her professionally in the lobby, offering a leather portfolio. "The complete inspection report for Unit 14B, Mrs. Walker, as requested. I've highlighted the actual violations versus the cosmetic issues. Thank you, Amir." And the tenant's response, initially argumentative, followed by attempts to establish social connections that might override the violations. Amir's neutral expression didn't change, but a slight tightening around his eyes suggested this wasn't an unusual experience with James. When those proved unsuccessful, he indicated he would address the issues under protest. Diana nodded, unsurprised. "Please continue treating Unit 14B exactly like any other apartment. No preferential treatment, but no targeted enforcement either. Just standard protocols." "Of course, Mrs. Walker." As Amir departed, Diana settled into one of the elegant lobby chairs, with the inspection report making herself visible in the main entrance where residents returning from work would pass by. The violations were legitimate. James had installed an unauthorized smart thermostat system that interfered with the building's central HVAC, accumulated multiple noise complaints from neighbors, and was storing his expensive mountain bike in the emergency stairwell rather than the designated storage areas. Right on schedule, James strode through the lobby doors at 5:45 p.m., his attention focused on his phone. He nearly walked past before registering Diana's presence. "Mom." He stopped abruptly, confusion evident on his face. "What are you doing here?" Diana closed the portfolio calmly. "Waiting for you." "Actually, I thought we might continue our conversation from last night." His expression darkened. "This isn't a good time. I'm dealing with a ridiculous situation with the building management. Some power-tripping inspector cited me for completely minor issues. Like storing your bike in the fire exit stairwell," Diana asked innocently. James's eyes narrowed. "How did you know about that?" "You mentioned lease violations in your voicemail," Diana reminded him. "It seemed like a likely issue given your tendency to prioritize convenience over rules." He dismissed this with an impatient gesture. "The point is, they're suddenly enforcing obscure regulations that nobody follows. It's targeted harassment. Or perhaps it's consistent rule enforcement that you're not used to experiencing," Diana suggested mildly. "Because you typically expect exceptions." James stared at her, genuinely baffled by this perspective. "Whose side are you on?" "I'm your son." "I'm on the side of fairness, James. The same rules should apply to everyone regardless of their perceived status or connections." Several residents passed through the lobby, nodding respectfully to James. He clearly enjoyed being recognized, standing a little straighter, his expression shifting to one of casual importance. "Let's not discuss this here," he said finally. "Come up to my place." As they rode the elevator to the 14th floor, Diana considered how differently James moved through the world compared to his father. Thomas had commanded genuine respect through integrity, skill, and consistent treatment of everyone he encountered. James cultivated the appearance of importance, adjusting his behavior based on what he thought people could do for him. In his apartment, James immediately poured himself a whiskey without offering Diana anything. The inspection had clearly rattled him more than he wanted to admit. "I don't understand why you're here," he said bluntly. "Did you come to lecture me about following rules? Because that's rich coming from someone who can't even manage basic finances without help." The condescension in his tone strengthened Diana's resolve. "Actually, I came to return these." Diana removed a set of keys from her purse. "They're the spare keys to the house that you took without asking. And to let you know, I've changed the security code." James blinked in surprise. "You're overreacting. I needed access to help organize Dad's things. You needed to ask permission first," Diana corrected. "Just like you needed my permission before selling the car or listing Thomas's tools for sale." "This is ridiculous," he muttered, draining his whiskey. "You're behaving irrationally. First the car, now the house keys. What's next?" "Next is a clear boundary," Diana said calmly. "You don't make decisions about my property, my finances, or my living arrangements without my explicit consent. Not because you're trying to help. Not because you think you know better. My life, my choices." James stared at her as if she'd started speaking a foreign language. This assertive, boundary-setting mother was completely unfamiliar to him. "Dad would be disappointed in how you're handling this," he said, finally reaching for what he clearly thought was his strongest argument. "He knew you'd need guidance." Diana touched the key pendant at her throat, drawing strength from it. "Your father believed in me more than anyone ever has. He trusted my judgment, my resilience, and my ability to manage whatever came my way." For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across James's face, the first crack in his absolute conviction that he understood his father's wishes better than Diana did. "Look, I know this is a difficult time," he said, his tone softening into something practiced and patronizing. "Grief makes people resistant to change. How about we table the senior living discussion for now and focus on smaller steps, maybe a financial advisor to help organize Dad's pension and your accounts?" Diana studied her son, this person she'd raised, but somehow failed to instill with the values Thomas and she had lived by. The realization was both painful and clarifying. James wouldn't truly hear her until something disrupted his fundamental assumption of superiority. "I don't need a financial advisor," Diana said simply, "and I don't need you to manage my life. What I need is for you to address those lease violations before you jeopardize your housing situation." His expression hardened again. "So that's it? You came all the way here to throw this inspection business in my face and reclaim some house keys?" "No," Diana replied, rising to leave. "I came to establish boundaries and to suggest you might apply the same critical thinking to your own behavior that you're so quick to apply to building management. Rules exist for reasons, James, even for people who think they're special." As Diana left his apartment, she felt neither triumph nor vindication, only a quiet certainty that she was finally standing in her own power, exactly as Thomas had always seen her. The full revelation of her financial situation would come soon enough. But first, James needed this lesson in perspective that no amount of money could teach. 3 days after the inspection, Diana heard a heavy, urgent knock at her front door. Opening it revealed a disheveled James, a stark contrast to his typically polished appearance. His hair was uncombed, shirt wrinkled, and eyes shadowed by evident sleeplessness. "Something's happening that makes no sense, Mom. We need to talk." Diana stepped aside to let him in, noting the nervous energy radiating from her son as he paced her living room with uncharacteristic agitation. The controlled demeanor he typically wore like expensive cologne had evaporated completely. I had a meeting with Reliable Properties yesterday. Not about the violations, those are minor, I've handled them. This was something else entirely. He raked his fingers through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Thomas that Diana felt a momentary ache of recognition. They're raising my rent 30% when my lease renews next month. 30%, Mom, for the exact same apartment. That's quite substantial, Diana observed, maintaining a neutral expression, despite knowing precisely why this was happening. She had personally approved Lisa's recommendation to adjust James's artificially low rent to market rates. It's outrageous. I've been there 2 years. I've never been late with payments. My unit hasn't changed one bit. James halted his pacing to face his mother directly. But here's the bizarre part. When I mentioned my connections with senior management at First Capital Partners, they do all Reliable's financing, by the way. The building manager didn't even flinch. What exactly did he say? Diana asked, genuinely curious about Amir's handling of the situation. His exact words were, "Ownership has specifically reviewed your situation and determined that market-appropriate rates should apply regardless of tenant connections or status." Then he looked me straight in the eye and said, "No exceptions," as if someone had singled me out personally. James's brow furrowed in genuine bewilderment. It feels targeted, like someone's deliberately making a point at my expense. Diana watched her son's confusion with a mix of empathy and resolve. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, James was experiencing what countless others did, the impartial application of rules with no special consideration for his perceived importance. And he found it not merely frustrating, but incomprehensible. "Perhaps it is personal in a way," Diana suggested carefully. "Perhaps someone noticed how you expect different treatment than others and decided standard policies should apply to everyone, including you." James stared at her incomprehension, shifting toward indignation. "Whose side are you on, Mom? I came here for support, not to be criticized." "I'm on the side of fairness, James. What's your argument for why you should pay less than your neighbors for the exact same product?" His expression suggested she'd asked why water shouldn't flow uphill. "Because that's how relationships work. That's why I've spent years cultivating professional connections. Everyone with any sense operates this way. And you believe your connections should entitle you to pay less than the single mother down the hall or the elderly couple upstairs. How exactly is that justified?" James looked at Diana as if she were deliberately being obtuse. "That's how the real world functions, Mom. Dad understood that. It's why he worked so hard to give us whatever advantages he could." The mischaracterization of Thomas's values struck Diana like a physical blow. "Your father believed in earning what you received through honest effort and treating every person with equal dignity, regardless of their status or connections. He would never have expected or accepted preferential treatment because of who he knew." James scoffed dismissively. "And that's precisely why he remained a mechanic his whole life, instead of leveraging his skills into management or ownership. He completely lacked business ambition." The casual disdain in James's assessment of Thomas's life choices, spoken so carelessly in the home Thomas had built with his own hands, crystallized exactly why this recalibration was necessary. Her son had completely lost sight of what constituted genuine success and value. "Your father," Diana said with quiet intensity, "was precisely where he chose to be. Doing work he found meaningful, valuable, and honest. The fact that you measure his life solely by title or income reveals far more about your values than it does about his achievements." Something in her tone penetrated James's defensive shield. His expression shifted from dismissive to uncertain as his gaze traveled around the modest living room with its comfortable furniture walls covered in family photographs, bookshelves filled with well-read volumes. "I just want what's best for both of us," he said, his voice softer, less certain. "A better life than this. Financial security. Status that opens doors. And you assume I don't already have those things because they don't resemble what you've been conditioned to recognize as success," Diana observed. "That says a great deal about how narrowly you've come to measure worth." James sank onto the sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. "I don't understand anything that's happening lately. First the car situation, then the surprise inspection, now this rent increase out of nowhere. It's like the universe has suddenly decided to single me out." Or perhaps, Diana suggested gently, it's simply removing the special treatment you've come to expect as your birthright, showing you what life is like for people who don't assume they're entitled to exceptions. James looked at her sharply. "You've changed since Dad died. You're different, harder, more judgmental." Not harder, Diana corrected. Clearer about my boundaries, my values, and what I'm willing to accept from others, including my son. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, James was confronting the possibility that his worldview, where status trumped character and connections superseded rules, might not be universally embraced or accepted. "So what exactly am I supposed to do about this rent increase?" he asked eventually. "I can afford it technically, but it's the principle. I've been an exemplary tenant." "Except for the lease violations they just documented," Diana pointed out. "Those were trivial technicalities that nobody actually cares about. The maintenance staff responsible for fire safety cared when they found your expensive bike blocking the emergency exit. Your neighbors with the newborn cared about your late-night parties. The building engineers cared when your unauthorized thermostat modifications affected other units." She held his gaze steadily. "You have straightforward options, James. Pay market rate like everyone else does, find a less expensive apartment, or make a genuine case based on your actual tenancy record rather than dropping names." He appeared to consider this momentarily before his expression hardened again. "This entire situation feels like someone's deliberately trying to teach me some kind of lesson, and I don't appreciate the manipulation." "Sometimes life does exactly that," Diana agreed calmly. "Teaches us lessons we didn't request but might desperately need." James stood abruptly. "I should go. Clearly I'm not going to get the support I expected here." As he moved toward the door, he paused by the side table where Diana had placed a newly framed photograph of Thomas in his workshop, surrounded by the tools James had attempted to sell his face, illuminated with the quiet joy of creation and service. "Dad would have helped me with this," James said quietly. "He would have made some calls, found a solution." "Your father would have expected you to handle the consequences of your choices with integrity," Diana corrected gently, "and to consider that perhaps paying the same rate as everyone else is simply the right thing to do." After James left, Diana settled into Thomas's favorite armchair, her fingers tracing the worn fabric where his hands had rested for countless evenings. The conversation had been difficult but necessary, perhaps the first time she had directly confronted James's entitled worldview without softening her response through maternal accommodation. Her phone chimed with the message from Lisa. "Tenant of 14B has requested a follow-up meeting to discuss rent adjustment. How would you like us to proceed?" Diana considered her options carefully. The simplest path would be revealing her ownership, now using financial leverage to force James's respect. But that would teach entirely the wrong lesson that money, not character, was what truly mattered. "Proceed with standard protocols," Diana texted back. "No exceptions or special treatment, but please document all interactions carefully." The more challenging path, allowing natural consequences to unfold while maintaining appropriate boundaries, would require more time and create additional discomfort for both of them. But if there was any hope of helping James reconnect with the values Diana and Thomas had tried to instill, it was the only viable approach. As evening settled over the house she had shared with Thomas for decades, Diana felt his presence more strongly than at any point since his death, not as a spectral visitation, but as the enduring influence of a life guided by principle rather than appearance, substance rather than status. "I'm trying," she whispered to the empty room, "to honor what you built, to stand in my own strength, and to help our son find his way back to what truly matters." No answer came, of course, but as Diana touched the key pendant at her throat, a quiet certainty settled over her. She was on the right path, not just for herself, but for James as well. The ground was shifting beneath his feet, challenging assumptions he'd held unquestioned for too long. Whether he would find stable footing or continue to stumble remained to be seen. "I think it's time," Ellen said a week later as they shared lunch at a small cafe near her office. A week of pointed silence had passed since James's visit about the rent increase, broken only by a terse text informing Diana he would handle the situation himself and didn't require her input. Time for what Diana asked, though she anticipated Ellen's response. "Time to end this charade." Ellen set down her fork with characteristic precision. "James has received his initial lessons in consequence and perspective. If you wait much longer to reveal the complete truth, the deception itself will become the central issue rather than the behavior you're trying to address." Diana nodded slowly, acknowledging the wisdom in Ellen's assessment. "I've been thinking the same thing, but I want the revelation to be meaningful, not merely shocking. I want it to illuminate the values Thomas lived by, not just showcase the assets he built." "So what's your plan?" Ellen's eyes gleamed with interest as she leaned forward slightly. Thomas's tools, Diana replied. The ones James wanted to sell for quick cash. They're the key to the right approach. After lunch, Diana drove to First National Bank, where Thomas had kept his safe deposit box. Using the key from his letter, she opened it for the first time. Inside lay meticulously organized documents, property deeds, investment records, insurance policies, all carefully labeled and cross-referenced. Thomas had spent years creating a comprehensive system she could navigate without his guidance. But tucked among the legal papers was something unexpected, a small leather-bound journal with "For Diana" written on the cover in Thomas's distinctive handwriting. Diana slipped it into her purse, saving it for a private moment. That evening in their bedroom, Diana opened the journal with trembling hands. Rather than a conventional diary, it contained a series of letters Thomas had written to her over the years, documenting his thoughts about their life together, hopes for James, and most relevantly, the philosophy behind his quiet investment strategy. November 12, 2003. My dearest Diana, today I purchased the 4th property, the small apartment building on Maple Street. James asked why I still waste time fixing other people's cars when I could move into management. He doesn't yet understand that true value isn't found in titles or corner offices, but in work that matters and choices that reflect our deepest principles. Each property I secure in your name through Walker Mechanics LLC. Not for tax advantages or liability protection, though those exist, but because everything I build is meant for you, for us to create freedom of choice rather than obligation to others' expectations. I hope someday James will understand that wealth isn't meant to elevate us above others, but to eliminate the pressures that might otherwise force us to compromise what matters most. Money should purchase freedom to live by our values, not replace them with hollow status. All my love, Thomas. Tears blurred Diana's vision as she read entry after entry, spanning nearly 3 decades. Thomas's voice reaching from beyond death, affirming the very lessons she was now attempting to teach their son. The final entry dated just 2 weeks before his heart attack affected her most profoundly. April 3, 2023. My dearest Diana. The doctor's news today wasn't good. My heart is weaker than we thought. I've accelerated the final preparations, ensuring everything is properly structured for your security. Ellen knows what to do if things progress more quickly than we hope. I worry most about James. He's built his identity on external markers of success while missing the deeper satisfaction of living with integrity and purpose. My greatest hope is that he'll eventually recognize what truly constitutes a life well lived. Not accumulation or status, but contribution and character. My tools, the ones he's always viewed as just old equipment, represent this philosophy better than anything else I own. Each one has helped create something of value, repair what was broken, build what was needed. They're not just implements, but embodiment of the principles I've tried to live by. If I don't get the chance to show him this myself, perhaps someday you can help him see that the most valuable things I leave behind aren't properties or investments, but the example of measuring worth by contribution rather than acquisition. All my love, always, Thomas. Diana closed the journal, her husband's final written words etching themselves into her heart. The revelation was both painful and illuminating. He had known his time was limited, had accelerated his preparations while shielding her from worry, and had held out hope for James's eventual understanding of what truly mattered. The path forward crystallized with perfect clarity. Thomas's tools would indeed be the key, not just as physical objects, but as embodiments of the values they represented. The next morning, Diana called Lisa with specific instructions regarding James's upcoming rent negotiation meeting. Then she dialed James's number. Mom. His voice registered surprise at hearing from her after a week of silence. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, Diana assured him. I was wondering if you could come by the house tomorrow evening. There's something important I need to discuss with you. If this is about the rent situation, I've got it handled, he replied, a defensive edge returning to his tone. I have a meeting with management this afternoon. It's not about your apartment, Diana said truthfully. It's about your father's tools. Confusion replaced defensiveness. The tools I thought you said they weren't for sale. They're not, but they're more important than either of us realized. Please, James, 6 o'clock tomorrow. After a moment's hesitation, he agreed. Diana spent the following day preparing, carefully arranging Thomas's workshop exactly as he had left it. Tools methodically organized on pegboards and in drawers. Projects in various stages of completion positioned around the space. the small television in the corner where he'd watch baseball games during particularly lengthy repairs. When James arrived, Diana met him at the door, dressed not in her usual casual clothes, but in the crisp button-down shirt and jeans that had been her standard attire during the years she had worked alongside Thomas in his shop before taking the hospital position. "Come in, thank you for coming." He followed her through the house wariness evident in his posture. "What's this about Mom?" "Your message was pretty cryptic." "I want to show you something your father left," Diana explained, leading him toward the detached garage that had served as Thomas's workshop for decades. "Something I think you need to see to understand recent events." The familiar scent of metal oil and wood enveloped them as Diana opened the workshop door. The sensory signature of Thomas's domain brought an unexpected lump to her throat. James paused in the doorway, his expression flickering with what might have been reluctant nostalgia. "Dad's shop," he murmured. "It looks exactly the same." "Because it matters exactly as it is," Diana replied, moving to the workbench where she had placed Thomas's journal and a specific selection of tools. "These tools aren't just implements, James. They built our life together, paid for your education, maintained our home, served our community." James shifted uncomfortably. "I know they meant a lot to Dad. More than that." Diana picked up a well-worn wrench, Thomas's favorite. This single tool has probably generated tens of thousands of dollars over the years, not through its resale value, but through its purposeful application in Thomas's skilled hands. Diana gestured around the workshop. "Your father had opportunities to sell these tools years ago and accept management positions you thought he should take. He had multiple offers, but he chose to remain a mechanic because he valued creation and service above status or title." James's defensive posture softened slightly. "What does this have to do with whatever you wanted to discuss?" "Everything." Diana handed him Thomas's journal. "Before you read this, there's something you need to know. Something that will fundamentally change how you understand your father, our family, and the recent events in your life." James accepted the journal with visible confusion. "What are you talking about? Your father wasn't just a mechanic, James. That was his passion and profession, but not his only skill." Diana took a steadying breath. While working with his hands and charging fair prices that ordinary people could afford, Thomas was also quietly building something else, something he kept private for very specific reasons. Building what James's curiosity was clearly engaged despite his effort to maintain emotional distance. "A real estate portfolio currently valued at approximately $4.7 million, Diana stated simply, "including, among other properties, Pine Ridge Heights luxury apartments where you live." The journal slipped from James's suddenly nerveless fingers. Diana caught it before it hit the concrete floor. "That's not possible," he whispered. "Dad was a mechanic. We lived like this." His gesture encompassed the modest workshop with its utilitarian furnishings. "We lived according to our values," Diana corrected gently. "Comfort without ostentation, security without status, seeking purpose beyond accumulation." These were deliberate choices, James, not limitations. His eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. "You're saying Dad owned my building, that you own it now?" "Walker Mechanics LLC owns it," Diana confirmed. "A company Thomas established 30 years ago, registered solely in my name from the beginning. The same company that owns 16 other residential properties and 3 commercial buildings throughout Denver." James sank onto Thomas's workshop stool, his carefully constructed worldview visibly crumbling. "The inspection, the rent increase, none of that was coincidence." "No," Diana acknowledged. "After you sold my car without permission, I discovered what Thomas had built for us, including the fact that you've been paying below-market rent in a building I own while suggesting I take the bus to work because I couldn't afford car insurance." The stark reality of his actions laid bare in this new context left James momentarily speechless. His face flushed with a complex mixture of shame, confusion, and disbelief. Diana placed the journal gently on the workbench beside him. "This contains your father's thoughts about what he was building and why his hopes for both of us, his concerns about the values you were embracing." Diana touched his shoulder lightly. "I'll give you privacy to read it. Take as long as you need." As she turned to leave, James found his voice. "Mom, We'll talk after you've read it," Diana said quietly. "Some truths need to be absorbed before they can be discussed." Diana left him in the workshop, surrounded by the tools he had tried to sell, tools that represented everything Thomas had valued and everything James had gradually dismissed in pursuit of status and appearance. In the kitchen, Diana watched through the window as James hunched over the journal, his body language conveying the shock reverberating through him. She prepared a simple meal, giving him the space to process the magnitude of what he was learning. Nearly 90 minutes passed before James appeared in the doorway. The journal clutched in one hand, his face transformed by what he'd read. The polished veneer of confident superiority had been stripped away completely, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expression utterly changed. "Did you know about this? All these years, did you know about the properties?" His voice was hoarse, as if he'd been crying or hadn't spoken in a very long time. Diana shook her head. "Not until I found the letter in the glove compartment. I knew as little about Thomas's investments as you did." She gestured for him to sit at the kitchen table, where they'd shared family meals for decades, where Thomas had helped him with homework, where they'd celebrated birthdays and holidays. "Your father planned to surprise me when he retired next year. He'd arranged a trip to Italy where he would finally tell me everything." James placed the journal on the table with uncharacteristic gentleness, as if it had become something sacred. "There are entries about me in here," he said, his voice small and uncertain. "Things Dad observed, worried about. The values he saw me losing." Diana nodded, recognizing this as a crucial moment of self-reflection that shouldn't be interrupted. "He knew I looked down on his job." James continued, shame coloring his words. "But I didn't think he knew. I thought I was hiding it from him." "He was more perceptive than most realized," Diana said softly. "He saw the gradual shifts in your priorities, how your definition of success changed from character to credentials, from contribution to compensation." James covered his face with both hands, a gesture that made him look younger and more vulnerable than Diana had seen him in years. "The last entry," he said finally, "about his heart. He knew he was dying." "The doctors had given him warnings," Diana explained. "Not a specific timeline, but enough to understand he needed to accelerate his preparations. That's why he arranged everything so meticulously, why he left the USB drive and the safe deposit key." James picked up the journal again, opening to a page he'd apparently marked. Reading aloud, his voice unsteady. "My hope is that James will someday understand that wealth is meant to offer freedom from external pressure, not freedom from ethical responsibility. Money magnifies character. It doesn't create it." He looked up at Diana, his expression a complex mixture of shame, grief, and dawning comprehension. "All these years I thought he was naive about how the world functions. I believed I knew better." "Your father understood more clearly than most how the world truly operates," Diana said, "including what genuinely matters in the long run. He deliberately chose to create lasting value rather than chase temporary status. And he built this portfolio precisely to give us options, not obligations." James remained silent, his gaze moving around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time, the modest but well-maintained appliances, the handmade curtains Diana had sewn, the simple tile backsplash Thomas had installed himself. A home built on conscious choices, not reluctantly endured constraints. "My meeting with Reliable Properties today," James said suddenly, "was that—" "A standard business discussion," Diana supplied. "Though I did ask Lisa to handle it professionally and fairly without special treatment." "What happened?" He shook his head, a rueful smile ghosting across his face. The manager explained in excruciatingly polite corporate speak that all tenants pay market rates regardless of their connections or professional status. He suggested I could either sign a new lease at the increased rate or provide 60 days' notice. Very civil, completely inflexible. "That sounds appropriate," Diana observed. "And now I understand why," James said, "because my mother owns the building." The absurdity of the situation seemed to hit him fully for the first time. A surprised laugh escaped him, edged with embarrassment. "I've been lecturing you about financial management while living in an apartment you own. I sold your car because I thought you couldn't afford insurance, then deposited the money in an account I controlled." His laughter faded, replaced by genuine contrition. "I was condescending, controlling. I treated you like you were helpless. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know how you could possibly forgive that." Diana reached across the table and took his hand. "You're my son, James. I'll always forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean continuation. Our relationship can't return to what it was becoming, you dictating and me acquiescing. That wasn't healthy for either of us." James nodded, a flicker of his former confidence returning, but tempered now with something new, a hint of his father's thoughtfulness. "So, what happens now? With the properties, with the company?" "That's entirely up to you," Diana said. "Thomas left everything to me without conditions. I could sell it all tomorrow and move to Italy, or maintain everything exactly as it is. Those decisions are mine alone to make." She squeezed his hand gently. "What I hope happens is that you take time to reflect on who your father actually was, not the limited version you've been imagining. The kind of success he actually achieved, not the narrow definition you've been using." Diana rose and brought 2 mugs of coffee to the table, a peace offering, an invitation to continue their conversation. He spent his entire life doing work he believed in, finding satisfaction in service rather than status. She continued, "And along the way, he quietly built something substantial enough to ensure our financial security forever if we manage it wisely. I always thought he was stuck." James admitted accepting the coffee, that he couldn't advance to management or ownership, that he lacked ambition or courage to move up. His ambition was directed elsewhere, Diana corrected, toward building a legacy that would outlast him based on values rather than vanity. James glanced toward the window that overlooked Thomas's workshop. "The tools. That's why you wanted me to see them before telling me about the properties. So I'd understand they represent his philosophy, not just his profession." "Yes," Diana said. "Those tools used with skill and integrity over decades built not just engines, but our family's future. They're the physical embodiment of your father's approach to life. Identify what holds genuine value, maintain it carefully, use it to create more value for others." She sipped her coffee, allowing her words to settle. "It's a fundamentally different model of success than the one you've been pursuing, but I think you can now see which approach yields more meaningful results in the end." For several minutes, James sat in contemplative silence, his expression revealing the internal recalibration happening as he processed everything he'd learned. When he finally spoke, his voice held a new quality, less polished, but more authentic than his usual sales persona. "The rent increase," he said. "I'll pay it, of course. No special treatment." A small smile touched Diana's lips. "Actually, I've instructed Lisa to offer you an alternative option. You can maintain your current rent by volunteering 4 hours weekly at the community auto shop Thomas helped establish in East Denver. They teach basic car maintenance to people who can't afford regular service." James blinked in surprise. "Seriously?" "Seriously," Diana confirmed. "Your father believed deeply in the dignity of practical knowledge and the importance of making it accessible to everyone. The program needs instructors. You spent enough time in his shop growing up to teach oil changes and basic maintenance." "But I'm not a mechanic," James protested reflexively. "I work in sales." "Perhaps it's time to reconnect with a different aspect of your heritage," Diana suggested. "Not to change careers, but to remember there are forms of value your father understood that might still have something to teach you." For the first time since Thomas's death, James's smile reached his eyes, revealing a glimpse of the thoughtful boy he had once been. "I'll do it," he said with quiet conviction. "Not for the rent discount, but because I think I need to remember who Dad really was, who we were as a family." Diana nodded, hope blooming in her heart. This wasn't resolution, not yet, but it represented a beginning, a crack in the facade James had constructed, allowing light to reach the values that had been buried, but perhaps not entirely lost. As darkness settled over the house, Diana and James moved to the living room, the journal open between them as they shared memories of Thomas. Each story illuminated another facet of the man he'd truly been, not just a mechanic who hadn't moved up in the world, but a visionary who'd chosen to build wealth quietly while living according to deeper principles. When James finally rose to leave, he paused by the front door. "What will you do with all this now, Mom? The properties, the company, everything." Diana touched the key pendant at her throat, feeling its weight and significance. "I'm going to live deliberately," she said with quiet certainty. "Make choices based on what matters, not what impresses. Starting with a trip to Italy next spring to see the Renaissance art Thomas and I always dreamed of visiting." She smiled, feeling Thomas's presence and the quiet courage flowing through her veins. "And I'll remember every day that the most valuable inheritance your father left wasn't measured in dollars or deeds, but in the example he set, that true wealth lies in creating freedom to live by your principles, not freedom from them." As James stepped into the night, Diana caught a glimpse of something shifting in his expression. A recognition, perhaps, that he had been pursuing a hollow version of success, while his father had quietly achieved the authentic article all along. She closed the door and leaned against it momentarily, acknowledging that the journey ahead wouldn't be simple. James's values wouldn't transform overnight. Their relationship would need careful rebuilding on new, more equal foundations. But for the first time since Thomas's death, Diana felt certain they were moving in the right direction toward the legacy of character and contribution he had always hoped would be his most enduring gift to them both. In the quiet hours that followed, Diana sat at Thomas's desk sketching initial plans for the mechanics scholarship program they had often discussed creating someday. Tomorrow she would call Lisa Martinez about establishing the foundation, contact Ellen regarding the legal structures, and take her first steps into the future Thomas had so carefully prepared, carrying forward not just his financial legacy, but the infinitely more precious inheritance of his wisdom. As her pen moved across the paper in the soft lamplight, Diana felt something beyond grief connecting her to Thomas, the continuation of shared dreams and the implementation of shared values. She was exactly where she needed to be, standing firmly in her own strength, ready to use it wisely, just as Thomas had always believed she would.